No question about that, and an even more special day for the Queen Company. Now, if you'd like more information about the procession order, you can find a specially made graphic on the BBC News Online part of the website, which details the formation and those taking part. There it is, bbc.co.uk/news, who is in the main procession. And just for me to say this to you, to all of you watching, because this is, I think it's quite an important thing for me to share at this point. These processions are very solemn events. We're talking about a state funeral. So the reason we're giving you all of that information online, especially to do with individuals, is because we don't really think it's appropriate to talk over lots of these processions. And I hope that you understand why we're saying that. So if people want to see individuals named who are taking part, well, then it's available for you online. But when we cover these processions live on BBC One here, we are doing so with minimal commentary, because we feel that is the most respectful way of covering what is a state funeral today. So that's the plan, and I hope that that message is one that you are receiving positively. And with that in mind, let me introduce my next guest, because Paddy Harveston is the former Communications Secretary to, well, the King and Queen Consort now, and indeed the Prince of Wales and the Princess of Wales now, but in a different capacity, a previous capacity. Thank you for coming in, Paddy.
My pleasure.
It's nice to have you with us. What's today mean for you?
A lot, personally. I mean, having worked for the King and the Queen Consort for 10 years and for Princes William and Harry, to see all of this play out. We actually, as part of his team, were the first to work on the accession on these 10 days. Back in I think about 2005-06, we dusted off the old plan. So to see it play out so beautifully, so elegantly, so in such a dignified manner. And then the King himself, honestly, I can't say how, it sounds a bit odd to say I'm proud of him, but he's just been magnificent. And I particularly loved his message today, saying thank you to the people, because in a way he's had to lead his family in mourning, but also the nation in mourning. And I think in a weird way the nation has sort of put its arm around him and hugged him close, and I think he's really, that's helped him get through this.
The big moment maybe was when he made that first televised address just after the Queen's death, and his eloquence and his readiness really to show how moved he was, I think affected lots of people, and they were genuinely impressed with that, and they were impressed with the way in which he was authentic and honest with people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not normally an emotional man, but I cried. I found it a wonderful combination of the personal and the constitutional. He talked as the son of his mother, and also as now the father of the nation, but also very specifically talked about how he would take on the role of king, how he would strive to live up to his mother's example. He also appointed his eldest son as Prince of Wales, so it was full of sort of constitutional importance, but also very personal, and I think all week we've seen that.
I think we can see Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales, and other political leaders entering the Abbey there. And just underlining again, Paddy, at this point, First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, also coming in. Just to underline the fact that this is a state funeral today, which involves all parts of the UK. Of course, it's taking place in London, but not just all parts of the UK. We've just seen President Macron and President Biden and other world leaders too. It's a British event. In many ways, it's typically British, but it's a global event too.
It is, and of course the King knows all these leaders, having met them many times. There was a lovely touch there where the President of the United States sort of was waiting and had to wait for the heroes to go ahead of him, and I thought that said a lot. But it's been great to see so many come to London to pay their respects to the Queen, and of course to the new King and his wife, the Queen Consort. So a truly global event.
When people assess the legacy of this just momentous reign of 70 years, and it'll take a long time to assess it properly, because it's far too early still to take a considered view of all of it. Will it be dominated by thoughts of the Commonwealth and the fact that we live in a far more diverse Britain than we used to, and the fact that the Queen has presided over unprecedented change in society? Or will it be dominated by thoughts about how the family try to modernise itself? I mean, where do you think the focus will be?
I think it's that sort of magical combination, really, of how the monarchy must represent continuity through, in this case, 70 years and the Queen must embody that continuity and yet also adapt. And I think the royal family's been very good over the years at very subtly changing, and it's never been at the forefront of change, but always at the right moment, adapting to it. And I think the new king, in a way, personifies that. You know, he took on many great issues as Prince of Wales. He was ahead of his time. He kept, in a way, the monarchy relevant as Prince of Wales, and I know his son William will be doing the same.
Well, the king did release a statement within the past 12 hours where he thanked people for their support, and there was a note of real sincerity in the thanks, almost as if he'd been slightly taken aback by the extent of people's support and sympathy. Do you think that's fair?
I think that is right, yes. But watching him sort of out and about, you know, around the four nations and meeting and greeting people, you could see how touched he's been. And I think it's just been an enormous source of strength to him and the family.
Paddy, thank you so much, and thanks for joining us. It's good to see you. There we can see the Prime Minister until recently, Boris Johnson, arriving, his wife, and one of the former Prime Ministers again behind Mr. Johnson. We have Theresa May and Philip May. So we have a real collection of people that the Queen will have got to know rather well, including David Cameron and his wife, who are just arriving now to be greeted by the Dean and others. Let's join Fergal again.
Well, as we watch the arrival of former Prime Ministers, we should tell you that the leaders of the nations of the United Kingdom have also begun to arrive. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, who last week, at a special sitting of the Scottish Parliament, said that for more than 70 years, Queen Elizabeth has been the great constant in our national life. She's inspired us, on occasion comforted us, and always personified values we hold dear. We can see the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer. And sitting near him, Ian Blackford, the SNP leader in the House of Commons. Michelle O'Neill of Sinn Féin now. And as we look at this assembly of Prime Ministers, former Prime Ministers, foreign heads of state, we're reminded yet again of Queen Elizabeth's place in reconciling, particularly in Northern Ireland, where her presence, her influence helped the bringing about of a negotiated peace. We are reminded too, of course, that she worked with 15 prime ministers, the first of them Winston Churchill, to whom she wrote a handwritten letter on his retirement, and for whom she accepted an invitation to dinner at Downing Street, a very rare thing. And finally, now, the last Prime Minister of Queen Elizabeth's reign, Liz Truss, with her husband, Hugh O'Leary. Miss Truss met the Queen at Balmoral just 2 days before her death, when, for the last time in her reign, she appointed a Prime Minister.
So as the Prime Minister is greeted there by the Dean of Westminster and by the Archbishop of Canterbury, she'll be joining, of course, her predecessors, including Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and John Major, Boris Johnson, Theresa May, and they're all seated in the same section of the Abbey. Now, let's take a look at Buckingham Palace, because we expect the next phase in this series of events to be happening here. We expect to be seeing quite a few cars leaving Buckingham Palace from the grand entrance, carrying members of the royal family to Westminster Hall. So they're not going to the Abbey immediately, they're going to Westminster Hall to see the coffin being transferred formally, and that they will take their place then in the procession to the Abbey. So senior members of the royal family, and Robert Hardman, still with me. Katie Nicholl, the royal biographer, has joined me as well. Katie, thank you for joining us too. We'll obviously be back at Buckingham Palace as soon as we see some of the vehicles leaving. But Katie, given that we know that these members of the royal family are part of the procession, they are senior members and they will be there with the King, of course, who will be leading that royal contingent.
Very much so. I mean, you're seeing everything that is about the Constitution, what we would expect of a state funeral, but we're also seeing a big emphasis on the family. As I think it's important to point out, we have done since the beginning. The Queen's children have been by her side ever since her death. You know, and actually earlier on, the Royal Princess Anne spoke about what an honour and a privilege it had been to make that final journey back from Scotland to England, and, you know, this final journey now.
Well, the scenes are quite magnificent. We've seen the Mall, which is decked in Union flags for the procession itself, and of course, when you see the view here, Robert, and some of the cars on the way already from Buckingham Palace. Here we are.
Define this day of all days, and I think it's important to remember that today we're actually going to see three royal processions. I mean, for the King, for his siblings, the scene, a feature of these events, the younger generation, as it were, the grandchildren who played a part. That never happened with previous royal funerals. Princess Beatrice.
Well, the Queen, of course, had a very close relationship with all of her grandchildren. She adored them, and she enjoyed having those wonderful summers with her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren too.
Here we are. In the Abbey, congregation now more or less all in place now that the members of the royal family have joined, but not all of them, of course, because the King and senior members of the royal family are across the road in Westminster Hall. They're at the Palace of Westminster. And they're the great site of the naval ratings with the carriage. Just there in the background you can see the great wheels of the state carriage, the gun carriage, which since 1901 has been kept for the specific purpose of bearing the monarch's coffin. And the naval ratings will be in charge of taking that heavy carriage with the Queen's coffin initially to Westminster Abbey and then from there to Wellington Arch, ready for the rest of the journey by road to Windsor. The ratings here, as we mentioned earlier, lots of them just been in the armed services, just been in the Navy for a few months. And what a remarkable day for them, and what a remarkable duty for them to be shouldering. The gentlemen at arms are just approaching, one of the historic monarch's bodyguards, and they're all company of archers, much in evidence in Edinburgh last week because they are the King's bodyguard in Scotland, and the yeomen of the guard, who are another form of royal bodyguard formed in 1485 by Henry Tudor. The gentlemen at arms, a slightly younger institution from 1509. So the Queen Consort is arriving at Westminster Abbey. I'm talking to David Hoyle, the Dean of Westminster, being shown in and welcomed. And they'll be making their way all the way down the nave. George and Charlotte, the Prince and Princess, looking immaculate.
Yes, I mean, I think we've come to expect nothing less of these two lovely royal children. And I'm just thinking back to the service of Thanksgiving for the Duke of Edinburgh, and they were there too.
So right now in Westminster Hall, the coffin is being moved by the bearer party from the Queen's Company, 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, to the door of Westminster Hall, ready for it to be transferred to the gun carriage.
The Queen is borne to the Abbey, where she was married in 1947, crowned in 1953, where she attended royal weddings and funerals. All, as with her own funeral today, part of the recurring seasons of death and renewal.
Party, stand still. Party, slow march.
In grief and also in profound thanksgiving, we come to this house of God, to a place of prayer, to a church where remembrance and hope are sacred duties. Here, where Queen Elizabeth was married and crowned, we gather from across the nation, from the Commonwealth, and from the nations of the world, to mourn our loss, to remember her long life of selfless service, and ensure confidence, to commit her to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer. With gratitude, we remember her unswerving commitment to a high calling over so many years as Queen and head of the Commonwealth. With admiration, we recall her lifelong sense of duty and dedication to her people. With thanksgiving, we praise God for her constant example of Christian faith and devotion. With affection, we recall her love for her family and her commitment to the causes she held dear. Now, in silence, let us in our hearts and minds recall our many reasons for thanksgiving. Pray for all members of her family, and commend Queen Elizabeth to the care and keeping of Almighty God. O merciful God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is the resurrection and the life, in whom whosoever believeth shall live, though he die, and whosoever liveth and believeth in him shall not die eternally, who has taught us by his holy apostle St. Paul not to be sorry as men without hope for them that sleep in him. We meekly beseech thee, O Father, to raise us from the death of sin unto the life of righteousness, that when we shall depart this life, we may rest in him, as our hope is this our sister doth, and that at the general resurrection in the last day, we may be found accepted